Howdy, folks. Happy Monday. It was a busy weekend and a sunny weekend in Buffalo, and I have something to talk about here, but Russ will start us off with the pre-show.
So let's talk about the Logan Paul Mayweather card. I'm not even going to talk about that fight because, as we talked about previously, the farce that it was that if you paid $50 was the fact that there was no referee, so there was no decision. It was automatically a no decision, and nobody got knocked down. So for 8 rounds, what did you really see? If you're going to say that this hurts Mayweather's career, it doesn't. He just pocketed more cash. But what I found interesting was on the undercard, Chad Ochocinco thought he could be a boxer. And this is what I want to point out. I've been watching boxing since I was a kid with my dad, who actually did a little bit of boxing and taught me. And so I know a lot about it. And the one thing I've learned about it over the years is you can't be a football player and have maybe 1 fight or no fights and expect to be a boxer. Even Too Tall Jones ended up having 5 or 6 and, did okay, but wasn't good enough either. You really have to learn how to box. There's a science to it, and it's not just about having athletic ability. Like Ochocinco could run around the ring. That was great. But the clip that's out there is the minute he threw his haymaker, he left himself wide open.
He was
knew that.
He was off balance. As soon as he put himself off balance. Well, I got a question coming off of that because I'm completely uninterested in the Logan Paul Mayweather fight. Apparently, people were booing at the end of it because it was such a farce. Who of the celebrities, football players, basketball players, baseball players, actors, who is the worst yet that you've seen? I'll tell you, Mickey Rourke was the worst.
Yeah, he was much older. He was bad.
He got in the ring and he got pummeled. Now, there are some other ones.
So I'm going to give you one. I did want to mention this, too, because Kevin will appreciate this, and I'd forgotten it for a minute. At the beginning of the round, which was the last round, Ochocinco went to Hulk up when the other boxer went to touch gloves, which everybody does. Even if you hate the guy, you touch gloves, and Ochocinco didn't do it. So he had to reach out to touch his glove, and that was it. He probably inflamed the guy. I'll tell you, the worst boxer was Geraldo Rivera.
Oh my God.
He was horrible. Everybody.
I got to just totally confess, and I bet Eklund is exactly like me. I just have not even little interest. I have just no interest in boxing. When I was a kid, it was a much bigger thing. I was very much into Cassius Clay turned Muhammad Ali, and he was so cool, and he was like a rebel and all that. And then I don't know when it was, but I had some interest into the Sugar Ray Leonard era and everything. And then I just, I like Olympic boxing where you go and you fight 3 rounds and then they throw darts to decide who wins. So I like that, and I get all kind of excited about when an American makes you run, but I just can't get interested in these big fights.
Well, I'll tell you this, and I'll just mention something that happened to me this weekend. But there's a documentary, I think it's on Showtime. It might be wrong. Maybe it's on ESPN, that is chronicling the Big Four. I think that's the name of the documentary, but I'm not sure. And the Big Four being Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, Marvin Hagler, and Roberto Duran. And this obviously stems from the 76 Olympics through their professional career and how all of them faced each other, because I'm pretty sure that they all faced each other at least once. So, that was the sort of the era that I grew up in, and that was fantastic, along with like Alexis Arguello and Aaron Pryor and a few other fighters.
There was a ton.
But then after it got into like the Tyson era, I was like, okay, do I really want to see Mike Tyson pay $50 to watch Mike Tyson knock out Michael Spinks in a round, or watch Larry Holmes punch Jerry Cooney in the junk? Because that was the only thing exciting about that Jerry Cooney Holmes fight.
It was getting worse then. I agree.
Yeah.
It does have a couple memorable, because I remember Down Goes Frazier.
Yes.
Yeah, with Howard Cosell. No doubt.
Yeah.
That was a star-driven thing for a while. It was star-driven.
I went to my first major league game in almost 2 years. Yesterday, Blue Jays and Astros had great seats, 4 rows from the field. Right. Hardly noticed the mesh in front of me, which I thought it was going to be distracting, but really it's so thin that you can see through it and it doesn't really affect your view. I just have to say I'm out of practice. It was 80 degrees. It was a nice breeze. I put on sunscreen so I'm not burnt through a crisp. I don't look like a raisin today. But after an hour and a half, I was baked. I wasn't pounding beers or anything like that. I had a hot dog, I had a couple pops. I was wasted. I could not. I mean, I must be getting old, Russ, because I had to go in the concourse for an inning and a half just to like cool.
Inning and a half. I need to go for a few minutes. An inning and a half.
Did you have a baseball cap on?
Yes, I had a baseball cap. I had sunscreen. Yeah, no, it was just. And
it's just really hot.
Nice breeze, but it was 82 degrees and it was really hot and it was
not even.
Let me put it this way to you, Mike. If you go to a ball game with Russ and I, we're not going to let you go to the concourse.
Correct.
We're going to sit out in the hot sun.
Part of this awful sport is having to endure that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, baseball's played when it's hot.
See, Ack would have left after the second inning because it was a rather boring game. It was 6-1 Astros until like the Blue Jays got a couple runs late in the game. So it was 3.5 hours long. So Eck would have probably the fifth inning, he would have been on the 190 heading toward Pennsylvania.
Depends on with, like if I will go to baseball games with people I like to have conversations with because it's a great place to go and have a conversation with somebody. Like, it's a wonderful like side thing. Oh, by the way, did you see they just got a hit? Yeah. Okay. So we're talking that kind of thing. But
and my voice is a little scratchy because I did yell and scream, not obscenities because there were kids around, but yell and scream at Jose Altuve, Carlos Correa, and Alex Bregman. They got cheater and they got garbage can and they got all the good references. Russ, I hit them with the whole cavalry.
You got them all in. Good for you.
I got them all in, and of course Altuve. I'm yelling, screaming at him. First inning, he hits a leadoff home run.
Damn.
Anyway, okay.
Nicely done. All right, let's go. We got stuff going here. Hello, Hockey World. It is Sunday, June 6th, 2020.
No,
it's not Sunday, June 6th. What am I talking about?
It was Sunday yesterday.
It's Monday.
Yeah.
When do we do shows on
Sunday? June 6th, and it's not June 6th.
I was looking at the scores. I'm honest. I was looking at the scores from yesterday because I fell asleep with the game 5-1, and I was like wondering if it's still 5-1 before I said something in a little bit that I'm going to say. But let's start here. Hello, Hockey World. It's Monday, June 7th, 2021.
I'm Michael Agello. Cheater, pumpkin.
I'm Russ Cohen. At 1:45, Shane Malloy and I will relive the Bruins drafting of the 3 picks in a row at the 2015 draft. That'll be fun. We were on air for that.
That's going to be good.
Kevin Allen, Hockey Buzz.
And I'm Eklund. You're watching the HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. This is the podcast that comes every Monday through Friday to fill you in the comings and goings in the hockey world. And my son did an imitation of this yesterday on the beach when we had a game that we had to imitate each other. So he imitated my introduction. It's pretty funny. As I was saying that, I'm thinking about that. All right. So guys. Now after you left on Friday, they along with Karine just totally ripped me apart for my prediction that Vegas would win Game 3 4-1. And they didn't win. I mean, no, but listen, I want to know it, but it was like the most absurd thing in the world. They won 3-2, which is really not crazy. And yesterday they won 5-1. Add that together for 2 games. What do you get? 8-2.
Oh my God.
4-1 by 2 and it's 4-1.
Oh.
Right. So to me, but the how absurd they made me sound for predicting that Vegas could win that game 3 4-1 was just unreal.
You didn't say a cumulative score for the.
I didn't say a cumulative score, but they won one game bigger than I thought they would, and they won game and I'm off by 1 goal. Like, come on! But you guys said it was the most absurd thing in the world. Like I had said, they were going to win 12.
Did we make you feel bad about that? If I made you feel bad personally, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
I'm not sorry.
We're just guessing who's going to win anyway.
I know. I mean, exactly. But I just had a feeling. And I said, Kurt Russell, like, you think Vegas is going to tie it up? And I'm like, yeah, I do. I think Vegas is going to tie it up.
Right. Good for you. They do play a completely different game at home. The home ice is working for them, no question.
Well, they were impressive. They were very impressive. And Fleury was damn good in both games, and especially the first game towards the end of the game where he made some incredible saves. I mean, and Grubauer, who had a rough day yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday was a rough game for him.
Was definitely great in the first game. I mean, the first game, I thought the Vegas for the first 2 periods, that was the best 2 periods they played in the series. They were just all over them, dominating them at every possible turn. So where are we now with this series, guys? Like, this is a 2-2 series now. We're going back to Colorado. It's going to change, obviously, again. But I'm at this point.
I'm still Colorado in 7. I think if I said 7, I still think they're going to win.
I'm Colorado in 6, which is what I picked at the very beginning.
Yeah, I think Colorado will win too. But we all said coming into this, I mean, Vegas was a very good team this season. So it's not stunning that this is a tied series, and it wouldn't be shocking if Vegas wins. But I think Colorado's going to win.
I think so.
I
picked Colorado in 7 too, but I just think that I think that at the end of the day, the reality that's kind of got me scared about my Colorado in 7 pick is that Vegas has, although they didn't win game 2, they have dominated the last 3 games. And Colorado really, were the first to admit that. The Colorado Avalanche players were saying the same thing.
I think that's fair, but I also think it did take the 2 OT game, whatever, to win. That's fine. That happens in any series. Yeah. And Vegas is definitely a different team at home. But how do we know that Vegas didn't empty the tank at home? Like, we don't know yet.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that first game, in Colorado was a bit of a fact of, I really still believe that Minnesota took a lot out of Vegas, and that was a tough one for them to recover from. So quickly,
but they still won the next one too, regardless of how they won.
They won the next one too. But what we've seen at this point is not a sign that Colorado, who I think we all kind of felt like was just invincible, they've proven to be very invincible, if that's a word. They've proven to be very invincible. Like, they're not an invincible powerhouse. Like I kind of felt like they were earlier in the playoffs.
Well, Russ brought up something when we talked pre-show, and I think it's a good point. It goes toward every series, even Winnipeg, Montreal with 2,500 people at the Bell Center. These teams may have gotten a little bit out of practice in terms of playing in front of fans, and the home ice advantage in terms of the fan, how vociferous the fans are and how loud they are, and teams may have gotten out of practice of being able to deal with that. And I think Russ makes a good point. It's like the Vegas crowd is really loud and boisterous, so
it energizes them. There's no question.
I think in Carolina, I think less so. I mean, at least Tampa was able to weather that better because they're really experienced. But I do think that the crowds are having more of an effect this time around because it's been a year and a playoff and an entire year of a regular season where they didn't have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's true.
That sounds like a reasonable theory, to be honest.
Well, thank you.
I've never felt that it's not intimidation of a crowd. It's just how loud it is. It requires some practical application. You count on hearing your line mate's voice.
Right.
Anybody who's played hockey knows how that works. And, that's why I always felt if there was a great impersonator in the NHL, you could steal some passes. And it happens occasionally. Somebody sounds like somebody. But, you need to hear. You need to hear what's kind of happening on the ice. And you get used to it and you can kind of sort through it all. But, you can't do that if you're not accustomed to it.
And we know that this is the case. Like in the NFL, they pump in sound into practices, but it's never the same as going into Chicago or going into New York City and facing a crowd that's throwing snowballs at you or yelling and screaming at the top of their lungs.
But it's pretty loud. Have you ever seen one of those practices? Like you can't think. It's so loud. I mean, it's. It at least replicates the decibel level. So.
Yeah, I think the adrenaline that a team gets when they score at home is something.
Oh, it's massive. Yeah,
I think that's the biggest impact. Like I think that, especially playing to no one earlier in the season. Excuse me. I remember talking to the Flyers quite a bit about it, and players and stuff like that, and they did say it was just very hard to not have that. Like they said, that was something that they just really felt like it was such a big part of playing the sport. Obviously they don't need it, but at the same point, if it's there, it makes a huge difference. They really felt like it did. And I felt like if nothing else through this whole virus, the players got a much bigger appreciation of their fans than ever before. I really do, because that playing like empty games, like felt like scrimmages at times. People, they would say that.
I'm sure Vegas appreciates you believing them so hard, Eck, and then still picking against them.
I know. I'm not game to game is a different story than the series, Russ.
Well, I mean, the biggest news of the weekend as we lead into another series is the fact that the Canadian government did approve the ability for an American team to travel into Canada for the semifinal or the Stanley Cup final, which they won't have to go to the Stanley Cup final because Montreal will lose the next series. But
you don't know that, Mike.
You're funny, Mike.
That's good. But I mean, honestly, as to talk about, the Winnipeg Montreal series has just been baffling and stunning in terms of, I mean, what happened, Kevin, to the Winnipeg Jets? I mean, if you could predict that Mark Scheifele was going to lose his head and get suspended for 4 games, and that they would underachieve so badly against a team that had the worst record going into the playoffs, I mean, I wish I would have put $10 on the Canadians on FanDuel. I'd be a millionaire after the end of the playoffs.
Well, the one I just had this conversation this morning with someone. We were just kind of talking about that, and we both agreed. What we always tend to forget when we start picking, there's always a team that surprises us. Number one,
yep.
And that the teams play differently, and we're all looking for reasons why the Canadians' opponents failed, as opposed to how well the Canadians have played. Like, they've played defensively, they found a way to shut down offenses. Their defense has been very good. I mean, you watch their defense, and it's kind of smothering at times. And there's always the guys on. I think Montreal just at this point is just playing really, really well. And does it mean that there should be no blame on Winnipeg? No, of course not. They should to rise up. If Montreal's rising up, they should too. But they haven't been able to do it because Montreal has played them really, really well, to say the least.
I mean, there's something to that, Mike. I think that we had to remember is that Scheifele goes down last year in the playoffs, right, to Calgary in the bubble, with an injury, correct? If I remember.
Yeah.
And then that thing happening was such a huge difference. Remember Calgary? I don't think anyone thought Calgary was going to beat Winnipeg in the playoffs last year.
Yeah, but there's one thing to have Matthew Tkachuk hit you on the boards and knock you out due to injury. Another thing for you to waste Jake Evans at the side of the net and get suspended.
Of course, but at the end of the day, they're still playing without Mark Scheifele. That's what's happening.
Yeah, but that's not the only thing. I still think their defense is only 3 strong. And again, when they're matching up against guys like Caulfield and Suzuki, they can't keep up, and that's what you saw that at the end of. And
Montreal's very much doing what Vegas did in there. We keep drawing this comparison to the Vegas expansion team, but this Montreal team reminds me so much of that Vegas expansion team.
Yeah,
a little bit offensively, defensively, they're set up completely different.
I know, but the way I'm more along the lines of the youth of them has them playing at a speed that's different than Winnipeg. But that's really screwing up Winnipeg. And that's what Vegas's whole key was how fast they played.
Yeah, but the thing is that the key players for Montreal have been the veteran guys, the depth guys like Stahl and Perry. I mean, Corey Perry's got 3 goals. He's doing
Perry's playing great.
Well, they're the ones who are getting the goals for sure, but the rest, but keeping Winnipeg confused is definitely coming from the whole lineup. I mean, all 4 lines just keep Winnipeg. Winnipeg looks so off balance. They almost look like they've never played the sport before. Like when you watch like this in the second and third period, there were times when players were making the strangest plays because they really have like Montreal's so in their heads. It's one of the more
they're having trouble with puck possession, and I think Montreal has figured that out. So. The minute they get the puck, they're converging on guys and either hitting them off it or getting them off kilter. And it doesn't seem like Winnipeg can get anything going that way.
Yeah, there's no room. There's no room whatsoever, and they haven't been able to make plays. And the other thing is that's sort of bothersome to me is, and we hear this all the time, that why we love the NHL is because it's such a team sport, and it's not one guy. Right. But as soon as somebody loses an important guy, that's all you hear about. Well, they lost Scheifele.
Sure, I know.
Well, we're a team sport. Now he's an important guy, and we had talked about how he was kind of built for the playoffs. Like he's a better playoff guy than he is a regular season guy, and he's pretty good in the regular season too. But still, it's almost like I was on social media and I was just reading it. Everybody's just saying, "Well, what do you expect? We lost Scheifele." Well, I expect you to play as a team and play better. and they didn't.
And to that point, Kevin, everybody expected Pierre-Luc Dubois to step up in Game 2 and Game 3 to fill in the void, and he's been absent without leave. He's been, honestly, I think he's been terrible in this series. And I've never seen two sides of a big deal fail as badly as Laine in Columbus and Dubois in Winnipeg. They haven't improved either.
Neither team won.
Right.
Yeah, I know.
Right.
Well, Pat, what I did find out, or at least I'm reading, I should say, is it looks like Dubois really wants to play wing and doesn't want to be a center. It looked like he was a center because they needed him as a center in Columbus, and he might be tired of being a center. And that's what I always worried about him as a player. Like, I felt like he was more effective as a winger, but could do both. And so now I don't think he really wants to play center.
Well, where is the put me in it, coach attitude?
Right. That's wrong.
Right.
Well, but
I want to play wing.
Honestly, like, if I'm a coach and the guy tells me, I'm tired of playing center, I don't want to play center anymore. I don't want you on my team.
No, exactly. That's even more makes low sense. Like I could see wingers being like, I'm a center, I should be playing center. And that makes more sense to me, the anger of that than the center wanting to play wing.
Yeah, we need you to play center. How about that? And we're paying you $5.5 million. How about that? But Russ, I thought of you as soon as I saw this information. So apparently Petrie last night got hurt in the game. I didn't see the extent of the injury or what the injury was, but they say he might be a game time decision for Game 4. And in practice today, it's not Romanov, it's John Merrill. They're putting John Merrill back in. I don't get it.
Again, this is coaches. They look at it and they're like, I'm worried about Romanov. He doesn't have any playoff experience. But the problem is you have to give him some experience before you can worry about him. And a lot of these coaches just default to the safe method, and that's what they're doing. They're going safe.
They do realize that Caulfield and Kotkaniemi were probably a good idea to have in the lineup, don't they? I
think they realized it when they had to. I don't think they realized it.
No, but they wouldn't have never gotten in the lineup. You think they never would have gotten in the lineup? I don't think
they would have gotten in if there weren't injuries. No.
Right.
which is totally insane, right?
Kotkaniemi would not have been in the lineup if Jake Evans hadn't gotten hurt in Game 1, and Caulfield wouldn't have been in the lineup if they hadn't been able, lucked out and winning Game 1 against Toronto and scored one goal in Game 2. So now,
Kev, there's one thing. Paul Maurice played into this because there's a quote where he said, "I'm going to keep Dubois on the wing for now because we're strong at center." So he went along with it too
Wow. Yeah.
You guys know I'm not a huge Paul Maurice guy. Like, he's not one of my favorite coaches. Never has been. And I think that, he's a great guy, a fan, but I've never really been thrilled with, like, in situations where the pressure mounts or a monkey wrench is thrown, like the Scheifele injury. That's where I feel like Maurice has always kind of fallen short in my mind. Like, he doesn't know how to quite counteract that. He's in his mind, the whole thing's like such an oiled machine that he's not good at adapting his players, and for whatever reason we're still seeing it 2 playoffs in a row now, like the same exact thing.
There is one other thing too, and this one will be debated for a very long time. When Montreal was out for a long stretch with COVID and we're getting back, they said they had a fair amount of practices, which a lot of other teams maybe didn't have because they were afforded that to be able to get their team back on the ice.
True.
And so now there is a feeling that, hey, that's what helped get them back to their game quicker than just a team coming straight off COVID. Now you're thrown back into action.
I think practices are really important, especially to young teams.
Yeah.
There
is that.
Yeah, so that's where we are with those two series. And then I want to get into Kevin's article from today, which I thought was really good. 15 things that should happen on the offseason. I want to talk about
before we get started on that, I want to just do a real brief thing on. I remember there was a radio show in Detroit that had this weekly series called "What's Your Beef," and everybody was allowed to call in about what their beef is. And I've got a beef today.
Go for it, please.
I wanted to throw it out there and see what you think. Like, I just think it's just wrong that I'm reasonably confident that a lot of people that we have on our projected free agent list are already, not technically, but signed.
Yeah.
And those have been put in the drawer, and they'll be announced the day after the expansion draft. And it's all about keeping these guys and have this. it's circumventing. It's not cap circumvention. It's expansion draft circumvention.
It is circumventing expansion draft.
Yeah, and I bet there's 30 or 40 guys out there like that.
I know it's really
they're just going to be hanging out their UFA the day after the expansion draft. They get signed.
So funny you say that.
They're already they got a handshake, and if I'm Ron Francis, I'm sure I'm a little. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it because if they're not signing,
he can make offers to the UFA guys, and they're just not going to accept them.
Right. I mean, what he's going to do
they're not even going to make it to UFA day. They're going to sign right after the draft. So it's like
no, but what Russ is saying is Seattle will be allowed to call them,
right?
Because that's part of
they're allowed to call. Yeah.
Well, what Francis will do is he's going to pick guys with term. He's going to have to, because I mean, what's the sense of drafting a guy whose contract is going to be up in 6 days? Just for the right to talk to him and have right of first refusal. I mean, there's no point.
Well, there is a sense if there's a player big enough.
Yeah.
As an example, if you had Wayne Gretzky being left out there, you would still pick him up because what you could get for the other teams to negotiate with him.
Yeah, and and this is not Wayne Gretzky, but if with a very light defensive market, if you decided, okay, on Tampa Bay, I'm going to take David Savard because I could flip David Savard for a 3rd round pick for his negotiating rights, then okay. Then fine. If you think that anybody on the available list on Tampa Bay is not as good as
what that can bring you, right? Then you might make that decision.
Right.
Yeah, but you have to put a team together the first year too, so it is a little tricky.
Sure.
I mean, and
they
I
can
agree,
sign
Kevin.
free agents too. They're allowed to sign free agents.
Right.
Right. Now, my issue here is a great Kevin. Like I've been working all weekend, and into last week on my free agent rumor chart, and I'm running the same exact thing when I call people. I'm running into really bizarre.
Yeah, he's signed. Yeah, I've talked to GMs who said
you said that too. Like, don't worry about tracking him at all. Like, and it's just like, but right now he's not signed, and I'm like, so I should be tracking him in somewhat shape. No, don't worry about tracking him. So I'm like, but I've also been told don't mention it who they are. So I've got this weird thing now with the free agent chart that I'm going to put guys on there, I guess, and just put them at like 80 or 90% back to their original team.
Well, I don't mind leaving people off free agents. I've done it for years. I mean, you don't put Alex Ovechkin as a free agent.
Right. No, I do that too. I don't do that either.
Yeah. I don't have any problems.
But these aren't Alex Ovechkins we're talking about. Like some of these guys are almost role players. Like some of them are,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Like I'll just give you an example, and I have no idea whether he's really signed, but I would guess he is. Or not signed, but that there's a deal, is Glendening in Detroit.
Right.
They didn't trade him at the trade deadline, even though teams wanted him.
Right.
Yzerman likes him. He's a team alternate captain, and he's from Michigan. I'm reasonably sure if he hasn't agreed to a contract, he will agree to.
Right. Now, yeah, that's a good one. That's a perfect guy that Seattle would love to have too, right? That is like the perfect.
For sure. Yeah, he wins 60-some% of his faceoffs.
Yeah, like he's a big perfect expansion type player.
Now, I have to say I want to talk about Carolina and Tampa.
Yeah, let's go there.
I thought Carolina, had their best game of the series, obviously in Game 3 because they won, and then they're up 4-2 in Game 4, and then Tampa Bay woke up, and this series is over with. Because, maybe Carolina wins Game 5, maybe they extend it. I'm sorry. Tampa Bay finally said, okay, we're dropping the hammer, and Mrazek looked like the Mrazek that we expected.
And there was something with that too, Mike. I only started paying attention to this when there were certain malcontent goalies in the league. I never used to worry about goaltending as far as how they get along with the defensemen and everything else. But Ilya Bryzgalov was the first to really whine about that in Philly. Like, well, yeah, they're not on the same page with me. I'm trying to yell things at them. And then he used to talk about this in depth. And it blew me away. Well, I got to tell you yesterday, and I forget which defenseman it was, Mrazek was arguing with one of his defensemen after the goal. Yeah. And I could tell at that point that the meltdown was happening for him.
Yeah, no, Steve Mason did it too in Philly. They had two goals in a row that threw their defenseman under the bus, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, it is in Mrazek's character very much so, like, to do that too. And we talked about Mrazek just having a huge ego and having the ability to make great saves, but also the first player we've ever seen who was still a Flyer whose locker was taken away during the playoffs.
And he was still on the team.
He's still on the team in the playoffs, and his locker is gone. We're like, wait, isn't Mrazek's locker here? No, it's not there anymore. Like,
it's
what?
with the Phantoms.
I don't know whether Brind'Amour can or will go back to Nedeljkovic. I think he can, but I don't know.
I think he will.
I think
he will. I think.
Now it's almost like he's got nothing to lose. They're down 3-1.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the amount of pressure is now Ned can just sort of like be the hero and not the GOAT, to put him back in. Like for games 3 and 4, it was the opposite of that, So I think this makes more sense now. And
the problem
now remember, Tampa was up 3-1 on Florida. So it is they did lose 2 games and end up in game 7. That was sort of surprising, but I think Florida is a better match against Tampa than Carolina. It's not a better team. Carolina's a better team, but I think Florida matches better against
them. The problem with this now. Go ahead, Kevin.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that prior to winning the Cup, Tampa Bay might have lost Game 4. Right. But and it's not so much that they won where they learned everything. It's how many games they lost to get to the process. I think. That's where they learned how to win that game, and they just have a lot of tricks kind of up their sleeve, and they have a lot of depth. And, you can just look at that. I was trying to figure out expansion draft. And you look at the number of vulnerable people Tampa Bay has. I mean, it's just startling. Like everybody else, you look at, we'll definitely put that guy up. Maybe they'll take him,
Right.
Yeah, and Tampa's got like, I hope they don't take him.
Right.
They got a bunch of those guys.
They do.
The one thing I wanted to mention.
Here's the thing about going to expansion drafts, which is funny to me. You go and look at their roster. I'm not sure that they have more than 3 forwards I would protect. Honestly, you go look at that. I think they're going to. I'd protect 5 defensemen off that team.
Yeah.
You might be right about that, and I think that's the magic of John Cooper too, because some of these guys will play better for Cooper than they will for you. Paquette's one of them, who's not doing particularly great with Carolina, but with Tampa, looks like a better player.
I mean, I just quickly did the expansion calculator for Tampa. Not protecting Tyler Johnson and protecting 3 defensemen. That means Johnson, Cernak, Cal Foote. I mean, Cal Foote's a former first-round pick, so and he hasn't played. I mean,
they might leave McDonough.
They might because of his salary.
Yeah, and he, believe it or not, I've looked at this about 10 times, and my eyes are might be going, because the first time I looked, I thought it was a no movement, and then I thought it was a no trade, and then it is a no trade. So they can expose him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they might do that. I don't know.
They might. The other thing worth mentioning is whenever Carolina loses, if they lose, it now becomes, even after that first game, that moment after they lose, they're going to ask Rod Brind'Amour, what's your contract status? And this is something that Tom Dunn has left hang out there. This isn't Don Waddell's fault. I think this is the owner's fault. And now
he's signed, Russ. He's signed.
You say that, but why wouldn't they? You could have announced.
Because they didn't want to announce it during the playoffs when they're trying to win a cup. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Okay.
So
I'm just surprised they didn't do it before the playoffs. Then that's all.
I mean,
I'm not sure it was signed then. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Kevin, the way it looks is just kind of crazy. Like the fact that they haven't signed him, and the fact that no one has been really even looked at deeply for the Seattle job is really just that's.
And the Rangers have halted their talks. They're clearly waiting.
That's leading. They
were waiting for Gerard Gallant.
They're waiting for Gerard Gallant.
They're waiting
at the World Championships. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they interviewed him once, right? They could wait for the second interview. I think they're still waiting to interview Brind'Amour if he's out there too.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I've heard that Brind'Amour goes and checks his new house status, and that they're ordering carpeting. And I don't know.
No, you're probably right. I mean, obviously, I would definitely trust you on this one. It's definitely around the league that people are thinking that Seattle is that Francis and Brind'Amour are talking behind the scenes. Like it's just they're obviously longtime friends and teammates, and
Yeah, and Kevin Adams in Buffalo and
right.
great friends.
Right.
Well, according to the reports that I've heard, the guys who are leading in second interviews are Gallant and or at least requests for second interviews are Gallant and Rick Tocchet.
Right.
Tocchet's had 2 interviews in New York, 2 interviews in Buffalo. I'm not sure about Seattle, but I mean, I think it's not going out on a limb to say I think Tocchet when the music stops, that Tocchet and Gallant will have 2 of the whatever how many.
They'll have jobs.
Yes.
Well, I hope the Rangers take Tocchet. I think he's a good fit there because I think he'll make the team better defensively, and he's going to be so thankful to have a offense because he certainly didn't have one. And
I think the fans will like him for sure if they.
I just think it's just he's just a good fit for MSG, good fit for the organization. Not that Gallant wouldn't be, but I just think Tocchet's better suited for what they need.
Let me just throw this out there. Hextall is a Penguin, Tocchet's a Ranger. Flyers fans, it's gonna be a tough year. That's a tough one to swallow. Those things are really that's gonna be really tough. But if Flyers don't do anything major or make any changes and stay with what they've got right now, that's gonna be a tough one for them.
Enjoy. Now, I have to say that the most entertaining of the 4 series, if it's not Vegas, Colorado, it's in a different way. It's Boston and the Islanders because there's not as much scoring, but there's a lot. I mean, Game 4 was an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. Now, Russ, I don't know how much you like the fact that Zach Wilson and the entire New York Jets offensive line are pounding beers and banging.
It's fine. I don't care. They're having a good time. They're in the crowd. They're really firing up the crowd. It's fine. It's actually, look, what I'm happy about is everybody's given a great send-off to Nassau Coliseum because I was around when that place was built. I was watching Nets championship games there. Even as a Ranger fan, I went to tons of games there, rooting against the Islanders or otherwise, basketball, wrestling, all kinds of stuff, concerts, so it is a great way to send that building off because I don't know what's going to happen to it. I'm sure they'll use it for concerts, but I don't know if a team will play in it next year. So I think in a way, this is it's nice.
Yeah, I agree with that, Russ. I've never looked at Nassau Coliseum as one of the great NHL buildings, but I respect the historic nature of the building.
Right.
Sure.
And I've been to some very loud games there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's really loud there, and it just it's such a bizarre press box setup that that's also part of the thing that just completely what you have to tell people out there. You walk up this really thin staircase that takes you up to the press box, like a metal staircase. You get up there, and your seats are like old school chairs with a desk that pops up and flips over type thing on right.
It could be better now since they redid the building.
I don't know if that's the last time I was there. That's what they had, and they were also a team that had incredible hot dogs available at all times for you, which is really something else I thought was for me. I'm not a hot dog eater, but when you're at Nassau, you're gonna have 3 hot dogs.
You know what I like too? The dressing rooms. I felt like I went back in time and it was like 40s or 50s when you went in those old dressing rooms. They're changed now, but
the point that Esmir made, it's something that is really missing from the buildings nowadays. It's I'm old enough to have gone to games at the Aud in Buffalo and Maple Leaf where the acoustics were fantastic. I never went to Chicago Stadium. I'm sure you did, Kev, or the old Boston Garden. But those were events. Those games were events because the crowd was so loud. And you just don't have that anymore with these big antiseptic buildings.
But here's what I would say, because I have been to all those buildings, the Garden, Chicago Stadium, Maple Leaf Gardens, Olympia. It's a different kind of loud, though. Today's buildings are much louder, but not in the same way.
Yeah.
It's artificial.
Yes.
You can't hear yourself think in a modern building now. And I find it too much. And it feels to me too that applause should be earned, and they crank it up artificially. Applaud here. It's like fans need to be told. They don't need to be told.
They don't need to be told.
So
that's true. Nashville still has a little bit of that old feeling to it. Actually, that building still has that old. It's it's not an old. It's kind of an old building now, I guess.
Well, no, it's an old building. It was started in the 70s and then it got renovated. So it is.
Yeah, but it's low too, and the difference, in a press box like in the Island or in Nashville has another weird press box situation. But it's like you're much closer to the ice than you are in like the Boston, the new Boston, the new Wells Fargo. All those things are just you're up in the sky. It's really totally different. Well, we're joined by Shane Malloy. Hey, Shane, how are you?
Gentlemen, how are you?
Good.
And talking about loud buildings, the old Northlands Coliseum.
Yes.
That was a loud building.
I did get to go there. I did get to go there.
That Carolina final, I was sitting up in the press box, Game 6. It was so loud. I actually had to pass written notes to the journalist sitting beside me because we couldn't actually hear each other speak to each other.
That was my one game there, Shane. That was my one game there. Yep, that was the one time I was there too. That was just oh my gosh, that was such a cool feeling to be in that building. It was incredible.
It was
well, the one thing about that the perspective there, even though you were really high, you were over the ice, so you could look down and you really had a real sense of breakouts. Like I thought it was the best place to watch like transitions and And especially they had in the 80s when you were there, they had such an incredible skating team. Like when you saw, like Anderson, Messier breaking down the ice, like those players were both at Mach 3 when they did.
Well, that was the aspect of the Odd that I loved, Kev. Now, the Odd was a one level arena until they built the upper deck before the expansion in 1970, and because of that design. The people at the top end of the lower deck, they couldn't see the scoreboard. They had to have TVs on the inside so you could see the scoreboard. But the advantage is that the press box and the upper deck, you were hanging over the ice. And that's the reason why the roof was low and you were hanging over the ice, and that's why the acoustics were fantastic in that place.
Well, the other great thing I remember about the older buildings. I went to Olympia when I was young, and you could still smoke. You literally, when you were in the upper level, had to go like this to move the smoke away so you could see the play.
I'll give you one even better, Kev. They didn't allow smoking in the stands at the Odd, but they did allow smoking in the concourse. So at the beginning at each period, as people were walking out, the smoke was billowing out like it was a smokestack. So that's how much. So anyway,
oh man! Well,
the reason we brought Shane on, Russ, lead us in here.
Yeah. So apparently, I just saw this posted. I was watching the Islanders Bruins game, but like any other good husband, there was other things going on in the house too. So I didn't have the volume on. But I saw that Catherine Tappan had mentioned the 2015 drafts. They showed the picks on the board and what the Boston Bruins did with that. And apparently she said, I know Don Sweeney's mad at me about this. And the interesting thing was Shane and I were doing the live draft show like we'll do again this year for SiriusXM. So we're on the draft floor. I did send Eck a picture. I don't know if you have it, Eck.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. Which email address you send it to, Russ?
The Eklund at I'll tweet it to you if you want me to do that.
Eklund Hockey Buzz. Cool, I can do that.
Yeah, but anyhow, so we were on air, and the first pick happens, and then I'll let Shane talk about it because we were living it pick to pick, and it was very unusual, and
So we're looking at the 3 picks, and Russ and I. Along with Steve Coolidge, who was hosting us and guiding this train wreck that's going to happen. So we get down to 10 and 11, and we're going, okay, based on my list, this is what I think they should do. So I suggested, look, all 3 of these guys that I mentioned are American. So I said, look, they could potentially build a second line at worst for a decade, maybe a number 1 line, depending how it all plays out and their development. So my response was you draft Kyle Connor and then Brock Besser and then Colin White. You have a centerman, a left winger, and a right winger, all Americans. So it's not only is that a marketing advantage, but also all three of these players could end up being second line players at minimum. And then Russ and I were talking about that, and then we had discussion about Besser in that, then Matt Barzell, and I said, well, I'm going to stick with these 3. It's part of my list. I'm not going to
check your Twitter.
Yeah. And then, in that conversation, then all of a sudden we look down the list and hear what happens is, okay, we're going to, at number 13, we're going to take Jakub Zobral. And I've seen Zobral play a lot. And I'm like, why? Don't get me wrong. Like, he could end up being a defenseman, like, number 4. But why are you taking him there? Right? Because he got carried by Shabbat for the majority of that year in St. John for the Seahawks.
Right. And actually, just to give a little context to that, Shane, you don't even know about this. I did a show a couple weeks, an Off the Post show, where we talked about the draft. There was a guy on from the Hockey Writer, Sean Resnick, who still does some Flyers games. And he came on, and we were talking about Zboril. And I said, I'll be honest, I like Shabbat. That's his teammate, and he was a lot better. So when we both saw Zboril, we were like, we don't understand this. And that really started the train going, too, even worse.
And then Jake DeBrusk has turned into a fine, second, third line tweener. But, there was value on this draft other than him. And then Zach Senyshyn. And at that point, I pretty much dropped my mic and my headset. And this is not going to work out well for the Bruins. Well, and, okay. And I happen to really like Keith Gretzky. He was responsible for that draft. But at the end of the day, this is what ends up happening with teams who have multiple picks.
Now that's us at the at our show table, and those are all the picks. Ainsley got all he was producing for us, and he got all the picks to interview with us at one time. So this is a moment in time now.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Let's add some context here, because the reason the Bruins got to this spot here. And Kevin was kind enough to drive me to the BB&T Center in Sunrise for that draft. The Bruins were trying to get Noah Hanifin. They were trying to draft. Hanifin was probably going to be picked 5th. Everybody pretty much at that point knew that the Leafs were going to take Mitch Marner 4th overall, and they were trying to trade up. And they had swapped for Martin Jones with LA, and then flipped Martin Jones to San Jose to get a first-round pick, thinking they could package 2 or 3 of those picks to move up to number 5. And San Jose and Carolina said no, so now they're stuck with 3 picks in the middle of the first round, and.
Oh, terrible place to be. Yeah.
Right. But it was a really good draft. I mean, we all said this. It was a really good draft. And Shane, the thing was, I saw a couple, and like you and Russ have forgotten more than I know about picks and scouting and things like that. But I had seen 2 or 3 Sault Ste. Marie games that year, because Morgan Frost, who was Andy Frost's son, was playing for Sault Ste. Marie. And I saw Senyshyn play 2 or 3 times, and he led the team with 45 goals. And I thought he was a good junior player, but I thought there was a chance the Leafs were going to take him in the 2nd or 3rd round, because Kyle Dubas likes players from Sault Ste. Marie. And then he gets picked 15th overall. I'm like, I had this guy going in the 2nd or 3rd round. He gets picked in the middle of the 1st. I mean, what the
I have a clip. I have a clip that I'll put on my SoundCloud later, that I had DeBrusk going late 1st or early 2nd. And I said, hey, he'll be like a 40, 50-point guy. That's it.
Well, and this is a trend that has happened in the NHL on far more than one occasion, where teams get multiple picks, either 2 or sometimes at worst 3, and they never learn the lesson from history. They always try to hit that home run. Like, let's be smarter than everybody else and take this player that people have listed differently, but that's okay because we're going to hit this out of the park and we have time. And it blows up in their face almost every time.
Yeah.
Like, don't overthink your process, or at least stick to your processes.
Russ,
because, and that's part of the issue. When I had an opportunity to sit in with an NHL team when they were discussing how they put their list together, and I sat in the back and didn't say anything unless I was asked to, just because I was observing for my book. And in many cases, you'll look and see, well, what's on the reports doesn't correlate to what's on the list. And it's one of the big lessons I learned from a couple guys who are really super successful at the draft is scouting is one skill. Putting a list together is entirely different, and that's based on operations management, not on what you know about the player.
Right.
Like, it's really about how you value attributes and playing styles, and then to correctly put those into value points based on what the rarity is and the value point of that player moving forward, so that you have less restrictions and less issues in terms of biases when that information comes from your scouting reports into your lists. And that's an area where, like last year with New Jersey, I really like and respect Paul Castron. Why you taking that Russian defenseman there? You didn't need to do that. Yeah. That's what happens when you have three. Look what Columbus did. I think the world of Jarmo Kekalainen, but that's what happens sometimes when, Columbus had those 3 picks and Marco Dano was in there, and like Reichel was in that grouping of 3. Right. And it didn't work out because they're trying to hit home runs with guys who have obvious deficient or inefficiencies, a part of their game that are critical, like skating. So there's, you're looking at a player and you say, okay, is this an inherent weakness or this is a developmental weakness? And if it's an inherent weakness, especially either up here, which is problematic, or in your feet that you don't have the right people to fix it, the likelihood of that, the probability of that player turning out to play more than 200 games is unlikely.
And we have to also say that it's the era too, because I went and looked back on, even in that interview, Sean had said something funny that I think is funny. He may not think it's funny, but I think it's funny because he liked Zaboral better than Shabbat because he was a better two-way defender in his mind. And I think in a way, the Bruins were thinking that too, because Shabbat was definitely not great in his own end at that point in time. There's no question about that. Also with Barzal, we had a discussion about Barzal because Shane knew more about Barzal than I did, but I went back and looked at my notes, and I did say he can make risky decisions on the ice, which clearly he's way past that now, but he had all the other tools. Everybody knew and he was skinny. He also had to work in his body. So those are, the few risks, and you kind of wonder if the Bruins were just thinking, we'll get DeBrusk because we know he can play in the NHL. We think Zaboral could just go into the NHL much quicker than he did, and he's not really a factor. And I think they were going for particular reasons rather than going for the best players.
Well, and this is part of the issue is, and this is something we discussed before, there are certain leagues and certain divisions in North America that are either vastly over-scouted or under-scouted. The U.S. division in the Western Hockey Leagues is always under-scouted. Yeah. Because majority of the scouts don't live in that area. So if they do go to see those games, one, they're seeing them on the road, or if they're going into the Pacific Northwest, they're there for a short period of time. So isn't the same constant level of viewing. It's not like the OHL. I call it the bicycle league. Like you could bike to honestly 10 different games there. Yeah. And it's the most over-scouted league in the draft. And it actually causes a lot of bias and issues. And on average, if you look at the success rates of the Ontario League and then where players are drafted, it shows by history that they're overvalued and where they are and where it falls and what their success rates are. And and also it happens that a lot of scouts get together in the OHL. So there's a lot of discussion, like the hens cluck. And what happens is sometimes if you got really strong voices and in that circumstance, not always, but in that circumstance, they're not right. Yeah. Then it bleeds off into the other scouts because it's natural. It has nothing to do with whether they're smart or they're not intelligent. Sure. It happens in a herd mentality. Happens all throughout. Doesn't matter what different vocation you're in. So you get caught in a herd mentality more so in Ontario League than any other league because they're so closely knit together and they see each other on a regular basis. Not like the Dub where we're really spread out or the Q. That sometimes happens because a lot of the scouts live between Quebec City and Montreal in the corridor. Yeah. So that sometimes happens. And there's always an eternal fight and battle between the Quebec-born kids and then the Maritime-born kids. There's always some friction going in that, and that crops up into the draft. So to me, it's about research. Go back and look at what has happened and ask the questions why and how. Without bias, right? You're not asking for a result. It's just that's what happens. And that's why I find doing that type of research interesting because these kind of things start to come up.
But this is how big of an error that this was for the Bruins because
it's catastrophic.
Yeah, and I'll just point out, and this is just, I'm not going to go through second, third, fourth round, whatever. The second half of that first round, 15 players are selected. In my estimation, 9 of them are better than Zaboral and Sinishin and DeBrusque. 9. That's 60% of the remaining picks in the first round are better than the 3 picks that they picked. That's
well, they got better picks later in the round. Brandon Carlo's way better than Carlo. And I had Carlo listed as a first rounder. I just liked what he brought to. I knew he wasn't going to be offensive, but I liked everything else he did. And I think it's a mentality. I do think there's a mentality that existed then for sure, but also exists in certain organizations that they feel like they have to fit a certain mold. I just think that.
Well, and there's also considering when you're looking at a player, there's the ceiling of the player and then the floor of the player.
Right.
And understanding what those actually mean in terms of and taking different concepts and models from other industries. So that like in terms of you look at the insurance industry of like understanding actuarial science. Okay, what is the high level of this risk? What is the low level of this risk? What does this mean? So when you're talking about I can look at certain players and go, okay, his ceiling, I don't think it's probability that he'll be as high as a third line center. But the floor, what's the likelihood of him playing more than 200 games? That could be exceptionally high.
What's really funny about this, guys, is what you just showed, Russ, and what you're saying, Shane, now is really, you guys, I'm not a scouting person at all. You guys are way late years beyond me, but I've sat with scouts in the press box many times and talked to them throughout the games. And I was with a Bruins scout, I think it was after that year, who said to me, he's a good player. I was asking him about one prospect I'd heard about. He's a good player, but he's not a Bruin. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, Russ, right? Like that is what I'm saying.
I'm saying like when they picked Sam Morin, when the Flyers picked Sam Morin,
right?
He was a Flyers type of player. The problem is he's not a good enough NHL player, and that is something.
Pat Caulfield, he's not a Flyer. Like that,
right? Kind of I think they get stuck in that. I think teams do. Now, Kevin, I want to bring Kevin into this because somebody that Shane got a lot of heat over was Michael Rasmussen, and I was against him. I was wrong. I said, hey, I like this guy. I like him down by the crease. I like his hands, and when he gets there, he scores. The problem is Shane was saying the opposite, and he turned out to be right. And Kevin, you were the first one that kind of led me down the path that maybe Michael Rasmussen wasn't that good of a pick.
Yeah, no, it's turned out that Steve Yzerman has liked him better than I think he thought he would, but not as a premium player. Right. He likes him, I think, and I think they've settled on the eye that he's going to be an effective third liner. He's going to be a poor man's Jordan Staal. He can do some things. He's really a man now, and he's more mature. He's smart. And I think he's improved a little bit on his skating. So I think now they see him as a serviceable player and that he's going to be helpful. But, he's not worthy of the spot in which he's picked. Like, he's going to be useful and he'll play. But, he wasn't a high-level pick. And I think they almost knew that the Red Wings did as soon as they got him sort of into camp. His skating wasn't good enough. But now he's really filled out. And, I see him as playing next season, as a full-time player.
And one of the things that I was trying to express to Russ is in some of the research I've done is I've taken a lot of work out of brain chemistry and the ability to handle emotional mental duress, and then look for statistical indicators to see if you can handle that level of poise. And if you go back at Rasmussen's draft year, even his draft, like the draft -1, he had a lot of had a lot of goals. The problem was a larger percent of them were power play over even strength. It was like really, I think it was in the 70% range.
Wow.
That his goals were power play. I'm in that range somewhere. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I have it in my notes. And then what the big factor to me was if you looked at his, not only his even strength to power play goals, but then you looked at what is percentage of clutch goals. Were they first goals, game-winning goals, insurance goals? That percentage was very, very low. We're talking into the 30s, like late 20s, 30s. So he wasn't scoring clutch goals. And then on top of that, when did he score them? Were they at home on the road? Were they back-to-back nights and 3 and 4 nights on the road? So when it was most duressful and stressful, he wasn't producing. Like, these are indicators that he has challenges handling the toughest situations, because I know if I went back and looked at his strength of competition, he was against the top teams and the top lines and the top defenders. He just wasn't producing. But he's a big, strong kid who could skate super fast in a straight line, and he had a bomb for a shot. But then if you look at a comparable to him, you look at Jordan Eberle's draft year. He's 5'10". He's not the greatest skater, but you look at his goals. He hit 56% of his goals in his draft year were clutch, either a game-winning, a first goal, an insurance goal. The majority of his goals were actually scored on the road. Not a big majority, but just enough. And it says something about him and his mental and emotional capacity to handle duress. So it's one of the models that I'm working on with a couple other scientists about trying to figure that out from a statistical standpoint. If you look at their output and then try to find what the leading measurements are, because obviously all the output is a lagging measurement, and trying to figure that out. But it was just something that jumped out to me. And I remember, like Russ, we were at the pub in Buffalo. Mike was there too. And so was Joe Jordan. And our two buddies from the NHL.com just gave me the beat down. Like they just went after me. And I'm like, okay, guys, like let's look in 5 years.
It was like, how do you not have him in the first round? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I refused to have him in the first round. And I said, no, early second. And they just ripped me. So Adam Kilman ripped me a new one. And then Mike Morale came and ripped me a new one. And I was like, oh, wait in 5 years and you guys will buy me beers. Because I'm telling you, like, I don't hit it out of the park very often. But when you do, you really do. Do I think, and I agree with Kevin, do I think he can be like a serviceable third line player? Yeah. He has enough hockey sense and enough skating ability and the size and the shot to be serviceable in that area. But at number 9, that's the type of value you can't afford. And hey, look, I got skeletons in my closet. So if any guys you remember Cody Roback as that, top end NHL defenseman, yeah, so that's one of the guys in my closet. So I have a lot. I don't pick on the scouts because I can pick on myself just as easily. I used to have a single closet, and then it went to a double, and now it's walk-in, right? So every year I'm adding more skeletons, right? Trying to figure out what the hell I did wrong. It's a tough gig, but that's where I think in many cases, like this whole example where we started with the Boston Bruins, you get caught overthinking it. And just you just can't afford it. You got to make a safer decision.
You got something there, Mike?
Yeah, just to finish off the show, some minor not minor for development of players, but some breaking news. The AHL just announced for next year they're going to play a season of either 76, 72, or 68 games with an expanded Calder Cup playoff field. And then back to the normal 72 games beginning the following year. So
yeah, when Henderson comes in, so they're trying to work on that Pacific division. Right. So they're going to have 9 teams in the Pacific this year, and then when Henderson comes in, they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do. Whether Henderson and Palm Springs comes in. So not sure if Henderson and Tucson slide over to the Central, and then it's just all the teams down to Pacific, like the Pacific time zone stick together, and those 8 teams. Yeah, I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I like the fact that all those teams are closer to their NHL teams, and it's better for the American League. And
there'll be a minor realignment with Utica moving to Abbotsford, and I'm not sure who's going to move into the division with Toronto and Rochester and those teams, but I would assume also that with this announcement that they're believing that the border situation will be straightened out by October and that teams will be able to freely move between the U.S. and Canada. Maybe that's wishful thinking. I think the NHL is thinking the same thing. So, and the news this weekend about the U.S. team being able to play in Canada for the semifinal.
I'll tell you.
Well, hey, since I'm the lone Canadian on here, so at least I can speak to our level of vaccination rollout.
Yeah,
I think it's entirely possible that the borders could be open fully by October. We should be by summertime. We're almost pushing into, but summer up here, be at 75%, 80% vaccinated by the end of August.
Well, the only thing I could add here, and Kevin, I don't know if you looked at it on the application for the NHL for the Stanley Cup, we were able to choose Montreal or Winnipeg as locations, and it didn't talk about quarantine.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think they've.
Maybe we just have to show our card, our vaccination.
No, as long as you have your your vaccination card and you've been double vaccinated, they're just going to ask you to wear your mask.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's it. Just
So
because we're still not convinced that whether you can carry this with you and give it to somebody who is not vaccinated.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
that would be it. So I'm not quite sure. Our provinces are far more strict comparative to some of the states in the US. So like where I am, it's super strict. So it's been problematic since then. So we're sort of hoping everything opens up for us in August, and we're pretty much good to go after that.
Yeah, and we're gonna have the draft remote this year, but I'm hoping, I'm hoping next year we get back to Montreal. I'd like to be able to get that what do you call it,
the hot dog? The bagel?
No. The apartment that I got, I had a fantastic deal on the whatever you call the rental.
Oh yeah. I would like to see it in Vegas. I like the draft. It could be in Vegas. It could be in Vegas every second year. You put the Board of Governors meetings in the same week, the GM's meetings in the same week,
the NHL awards,
a bunch of different events around there, card collectible, and all kinds of different events going on. The draft Friday, Saturday. You push everything into 1 week. Everybody's on the Strip. That's where all the different venues are. I think it would be every second year. Just let's go back to Vegas. It's got all the hotels. It's cheap to fly to, and you get lots of fans. You're going to get tons of media, and then you can because not all the teams, they don't really like hosting the draft. It's not a moneymaker. So in Vegas, it could be a moneymaker. It opens up opportunities to promote the game in different ways because you have the variety of venues and opportunities to do that.
Yeah, and I'll leave my credit cards at home. Okay, Kevin, thank you for being on the show as usual. And the departed Eklund will be back tomorrow. For Shane Malloy, for Russ Cohen, for Kevin Allen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching. And remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.